folks, it's James here. How you all doing? Hope you're well. A vinyl finds video for you, and a grail in the mail and various other bits and bobs. So we'll start with what you can hear in the background. This is The World of the Tornadoes. A friend of mine was doing some voluntary work for a kind of community radio station in Morecambe, and he phoned me up and said that in the room there that they use in the studio, whatever, there was a huge pile of old records. He asked me if I wanted to look through them. He suspected that it was just a big load of old rubbish, but I said, well, you know, bring it over. So he loaded all the records into the car, brought them over, and I looked through them. It was mostly stuff like Mario Lanza and just opera box sets and things I wasn't interested in. This was the only thing that I thought was worth plucking out, so I did. I've got a 45 of Telstar, which was the Tornadoes' biggest hit in the 60s, and this is what's playing now. Always loved that, so I thought it would be quite good fun to have the record. They were a kind of instrumental beat group in the 1960s. They played back up on a lot of the hits that Joe Meek recorded. Not the most photogenic bunch, but yeah, good fun. Okay, so yeah, just a few things to show you. A Grail in the Mail. This is a record that for some reason I had an idea in my head that it was going to be hard to get hold of, and I think it was because maybe it came out in the late 80s, I think, when, you know, CDs were on the ascendant and vinyl was on the descendant. But in fact, when I looked online, it wasn't hard to find at all. So I grabbed a copy of it from, I think it was from eBay. So this is Shannon Rock On, and this was the final album that he made. And unfortunately, he committed suicide before the album came out. I think he committed suicide in the February of maybe 1991. The album came out in the October, so it had to be finished up in his absence, which is a great shame. Shannon, obviously, he was a kind of legendary rock and roll star from the 60s, and I'd loved him for many years, and he was kind of associated with the Wilburys in the late 80s thanks to his friendship with Tom Petty and Jeff Lynne and George Harrison. He was big friends with those guys, and on this record you've got Jeff Lynne and Mike Campbell co-produce it together. I think Jeff produces half the tracks and Mike Campbell does the other. Also on this record you've got Beaumont Tench, the keyboard player from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and it's a great album. I had it, well, I didn't have it, a friend of mine had it on cassette back in the day, and I've got a great memory of having a driving holiday down the Welsh coast. My friend bought it on cassette and we had it in the car, and it's got some really good stuff on it. I mean, it has that Jeff Lynne late 80s sound written all over it. It was a really, you know, lucrative sound that Jeff came up with back in those days. It saw him through Cloud 9 by George Harrison, Full Moon Fever and Into the Great Wide Open by Tom Petty, Mystery Girl by Roy Orbison, you know, various other albums. It was just a great shame that for some reason, you know, Del apparently was in a good place while he was recording this album. He was very excited by how things were going, and he was enjoying, I think he kind of saw it as being a comeback. It was his 12th album, I think, and he shot himself at some point during 1991. He just decided he'd had enough of life and just put an end to it, and the album came out afterwards, so there you go. Terribly tragic, but a great album, one that I was delighted to finally add to my collection. Let's just whip through some of the others. So this was a new record bought from Amazon. This is Badfinger and Wish You Were Here. This is a group that I've long known about, obviously because of their association with the Beatles, but for some reason I just never got round to them. I knew their history, I knew this kind of terrible tragic history where they'd been ripped off by their manager, and I think at least 2 members of the band killed themselves, so there's a bit of a suicide theme coming across in this video. I do apologise. This is on green vinyl, Warner's, and this was, I think this was maybe their 6th album, and it's just fantastic. It's kind of, you know, power pop, bit of heavy rock, bit of Beatles melody, and lots of lovely kind of thick vocal harmonies. Some great songs. I think side 2 is better than side 1, or I prefer side 2. The final 2 tracks are fantastic. Meanwhile, Back at the Ranch and Should I Smoke, both great kind of grooving rockers really. And one thing I noticed about this record is that this guy on the front, to me he looks like Michael Stipe. Not sure if I'm imagining that. Anyway, yeah, that was a nice sounding reissue. Like I said, I bought that a while ago now. I saw it for a good price, so I snapped it up. Would like to get hold of the other Badfinger albums, preferably OGs of them, but they never appear, you know, in the wild in the UK. But I would like to explore more of their music because I like what I hear. From Find, this is Rick Derringer and his album All American Boy, which turned up in Oxfam in Lancaster a while ago. I knew his name from his association with Steely Dan. He also played with the Edgar Winter group, whose music I don't really know. I had a gut feeling I was going to love this record, or at least like it a lot, just from the cover. And here's the gatefold. And I wasn't mistaken. It's a hard rocking set. The artist that it really strongly reminds me of is mid 1970s Todd Rundgren. I think it's the chord progressions he uses. He uses a lot of quite fancy, you know, chord suspensions and augmented chords or whatever. And it has that kind of blue-eyed soul thing that Todd Rundgren did so well in the 70s. Kind of stirred in with kind of heavy rock. Well, not heavy rock, but kind of, you know, vibey, good time rock music. Nice kind of mid-1970s production on this. Lots of really nice, quite sophisticated pop rock songs really, like I said, with a bit of a soulful edge. Bit of Steely Dan creeping in. Yeah, it was just a really good record, and it was just, I don't know, it's just a weird thing to find in Oxfam. It's not the kind of thing I would have expected to see, but I was delighted to pick it up. Show you the record. Is it anything special? Maybe not. Epic, yellow. And 1973. I looked him up, don't know a great deal about him other than that he worked with Steely Dan and Joe Walsh and Edgar Winter, and I wasn't even sure if he was still alive, but he is. Rick Derringer and All American Boy. Okay, the next record I found in my local antiques centre, and I grabbed it on my way out. I saw it in a cardboard box, just kind of sat on the floor looking lost and lonely. So this is Gordon Gilltrap and Visionary. Thought it looked quite interesting from the cover. Didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know a great deal about Gordon Gilltrap. He was on the scene in the 1960s, that kind of folk guitar scene, you know, that gave birth to people like John Renbourn and Burt Jansch, people like that, and John Martin. So I was expecting this to be kind of a bit folky, a bit guitar-y, you know, in that way, in that folk way. But it's actually probably more of a kind of art rock album. Kind of shades of Tubular Bells, Mike Oldfield, who of course was also on that scene as well back in the 60s. Apparently it was inspired or based on the poems of William Blake. You've got Awakening, The Price of Experience, The Dance of Albion, The Tiger. There's no lyrics as such, so it's a kind of musical evocation of William Blake's visionary poetry. And it's an interesting record. It's a lot of overdubbing, a lot of you know, guitar layers and textures. There's a bit of maybe a kind of symphonic approach going on with themes coming in and, you know, returning. It's got some nice melodies on it. It's just a really interesting record. 1976. Like I said, I didn't really know what to expect, and so it was maybe a more interesting record than I thought it was going to be. I need to give it a few more spins to properly get my head around it. It's not exactly a kind of a very immediate record. You know, it's not a kind of toe-tapping experience, but it's certainly very interesting. And yeah, if you like kind of art rock, prog rock, Mike Oldfield, instrumental guitar music, I would say this is definitely worth checking out if you see it. Okay, so the next record, I love this. I picked this up from Oxfam. This is Hall & Oates. And I've never checked out their music. I listened to it, and the first time I heard it, I wasn't all that impressed with it. The second time I heard it, I really enjoyed it, and then I couldn't stop playing it after that. It's just one of those really, really well-crafted 1970s pop soul albums. I mean, you've got all the intricate arrangements, you know, again, a bit like Todd Rundgren. You've got shades of classic soul music. You know, their vocal style often reminds me of Marvin Gaye. And actually it's 1980, this record, it wasn't a 1970s album. And I just like the way that they arrange stuff. You can kind of get lost in their arrangements. They're very intricate, and lots of different melodies going on and counter melodies, and it's kind of soft, soulful, late night music with some good tunes, but it's also got a slightly kind of, I don't know, like kind of left field thing going on, almost not quite as much as this, but if you think of Tusk by Fleetwood Mac, you know, some of the stuff that Lindsey Buckingham did on Tusk, slightly more abrasive stuff coming in occasionally, and kind of just slightly jerky rhythms and just things that you don't quite expect. It's kind of, it's smooth music, but there's a few angular turns in there, a few tricky manoeuvres that just make it interesting to listen to. It's a real kind of earworm record, and it's really captured my imagination. So I've no idea if I'm going to start buying Oates, Hall & Oates records. I mean, we'll have to see, you know, but I really enjoyed that one. So yeah, good stuff. And then finally, just got a couple of Deacon Blue albums. Got this one from Heightside Records in Lancaster, which is a record store which comes to town. And this one is When the World Knows Your Name, and it is from 1989. So I kind of missed out on Deacon Blue back in the day. I think they're one of those bands that, I don't know, they never really had much credibility, I don't think. They were sort of, they kind of bypassed all the cool cred stuff that was going on at the time. You know, you think the kind of late 80s, you're talking about the Stone Roses, and you're talking about Manchester going on, you know. Whereas Deacon Blue had, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a session musician thing going on. I don't know. I mean, they weren't session musicians, but their records had a very, well, a rather clinical sound, I think. And but last year I bought Raintown, having seen Steve Whitty's review here on the VC, and I love that album. So I've been on the lookout for their records. So there was this one which has that big blue-eyed soul kind of classic Deacon Blue sound, maybe a bit less dated on the keyboards than Raintown. But yeah, that's a good album. And then I also, on the same day, I also picked up this album, also by Deacon Blue. This one is Whatever You Say, Say Nothing. And this one comes a little bit later in the discography. I think it comes from maybe 1993. And actually, this was the first Deacon Blue music I really heard. There's a song on this album, and it's called Your Town. And I had that on a CD single. And I'd totally forgotten about it, and I used to really like it, and I don't really know why I didn't check out Deacon Blue at the time. It's just one of those things, you know. But this record is interesting because I think, to my ears, it sounds like they're trying to shake off some of that rather dated, boomy kind of 80s anthemic thing, and they're trying to go for a slightly edgier 90s sound. Now the production on this, I'm sure Steve Osborne, oh, and Paul Oakenfold, that's right, it's produced by Paul Oakenfold, who was really massive in the 90s. You know, he had a great way of producing slightly edgy alternative rock with lots of layered textures. And this record is a definite attempt to do something edgier and a bit more left field. You know, Deacon Blue always dealt in big emotional gestures and quite kind of heart on the sleeve kind of stuff, you know, with the female voice in the background doing all that swooping and all that emotional stuff. But here it's much more restrained, and it's much more of a production album. I think a kind of alternative 90s kind of production sound. Really good stuff, quality British songwriting, very melodic, very interesting melodies, interesting lyrics. Just a good band, and one that I kind of wish I'd been into back in the day, really, because it's strange, isn't it, when you sort of, you miss bands at the time, you don't listen, you don't bother checking them out, and years later you look back and you think, I wonder why I didn't buy the records, you know, I wonder why I didn't buy that band's records, because their music is right up my street, really, and that's just the way it goes, isn't it? I'm a big fan of going back and checking out music that I missed first time round. I sort of prefer that in a way to digging around trying to find brand new things, because I always figure there's just so much I've missed, you know. Anyway, ramble over. Hope you enjoyed that, and yeah, that's it for now. Hope you're all well, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye bye.